On August 16th, I made a video titled "The New York Mets Need to Make a Major Change." And in that video, the change I was talking about was moving on from manager Luis Rojas. Mets were in first place for most of the season, but they were slowly finding their way out of first place and falling further and further behind. Today, the New York Mets finally decided to fire Luis Rojas after the damage was already done and the New York Mets had another losing season. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the firing of Luis Rojas, my reaction to it, my take on it, and what the Mets need to do next. It's one thing that the New York Mets fired Luis Rojas. It's something I've been saying for a while, that the Mets need to move on from Luis Rojas because he made a lot of mistakes that cost the Mets some games. But it's one thing to fire the manager, but the most important thing is now getting somebody to replace him that can actually help the New York Mets win more games. So in this video, we also look at those candidates, talk about what I like, what I don't like about them, but I want to hear from you guys. Now that Luis Rojas is gone, who would be your #1 choice for the manager of the Mets? Try to be realistic. It's not going to be Kevin Cash. And if you like this video, leave a like. If you're new here, you could subscribe. You could watch my video from August 16th when I was ranting about Luis Rojas if you want to have a good laugh at me yelling and complaining. So let's get into it. Why did Luis Rojas get fired? The obvious answer is because of how the Mets finished the season, being under 500. But what bothered me the most about Luis Rojas was the mistakes that he made, making the same mistakes multiple times, and then just his overall mentality, which rubbed off on the entire team, which was a mentality that I am strongly against. And I always called it a scared mentality, afraid to take the extra base, afraid to steal bases, afraid to send a runner home, afraid to swing the bat. With Marcus Stroman, this is the play that I always go back to. I think really showing you everything you need to know about Luis Rojas and the Mets philosophy. That big game against the Philadelphia Phillies, bases loaded, nobody out, Marcus Stroman at the plate. He told Marcus Stroman not to swing the bat. He was afraid that Marcus Stroman was going to hit into a double play, so if Stroman strikes out, Nimmo hits into a double play. The very next batter, Mets score no runs, and the opposing pitcher for the Phillies, Kyle Gibson, gets an RBI hit. Meanwhile, after that, Marcus Stroman got a bunch of bunt hits. So even if you had a bunt for a hit, maybe you score a run. The Phillies are not a great defensive team. You could have scored a run there. And then the way that Rojas focused way too much on lefty-righty matchups. He would rather have Albert Almora bat over a left-handed batter like a Luis Guillorme or somebody else just because Albert Almora is right-handed going up against a left-handed pitcher. And he did it the other way too, where he'd bring in a left-handed batter over a guy who's a much better hitter even though it's a right-handed batter against a right-handed pitcher. Another thing that Luis Rojas did that was very frustrating was his refusal to intentionally walk batters. This was particularly evident in the game against the Miami Marlins with Brian De La Cruz, where we all said, walk De La Cruz, he's swinging a red-hot bat, he's probably the best hitter on the Marlins at the time, and faced the batter after him who was nowhere near as good. I'm pretty sure it was Lewin Diaz at the time. But instead, they decided to pitch to De La Cruz, and it cost the Mets the game. This also happened in a game right before that against Cincinnati, where they could have intentionally walked Jesse Winker, and Winker ended up tying up the game. So it's one thing to make a mistake, but in life, if you learn from your mistakes and you don't let it happen again and you're willing to change, that's really important. But the fact that Luis Rojas would continue to make the same mistakes show me that he's not someone that is willing to change. The fact that you have Francisco Lindor on this team, Brandon Nimmo, who has really good speed, just look at his baseball savant page, Javier Baez, you have some guys that could run, and the New York Mets would never send them. They would not try to steal bases. Even though the Mets were struggling so much offensively and they hit into so many double plays, you would think that maybe you should send a runner to prevent a double play, or just to get the pitcher second guessing, maybe get the defense to move around, open up a hole for a hitter. And when you have all these guys who are pulling into the shift, maybe dropping down a bunt the other way every now and then, just trying to do something different. And the Mets never did that. So obviously Luis Rojas had to go, and I find it very interesting that literally the exact day after the regular season is over, the Mets got rid of Rojas, which shows you that this was not something that the Mets were kind of thinking about. Maybe we're going to keep him, maybe we're not. The Mets were absolutely like, we have got to get rid of this guy. So now let's get to the fun part. Let's talk about some of the potential replacements. Now, SNY posted this graphic of some managerial candidates, so we will go over them. What I like about these guys, what I don't like about these guys. The first guy that's on this list, and someone that you'll see a lot on Twitter, a lot of Met fans talk about, is Carlos Beltran, who some of you may know is my favorite Met of all time. Despite what happened in 06 against the Cardinals, he did so much for that team, particularly in 06 when he could have won the MVP. But we know the whole Houston Astros scandal, Carlos Beltran, they had to fire fire him, this, that, and the other. Carlos Beltran is not my first choice, as much as I liked him as a player. I don't love bringing in another rookie manager. I don't love bringing in a guy, Carlos Beltran, who is so soft-spoken, because another thing I did not like about Luis Rojas is that when Jonathan Villar would make a boneheaded play on the bases, or when the Mets would just do overall dumb things, which they tend to do too frequently, it didn't seem to bother Luis Rojas. Instead of Luis Rojas going up to a player, trying to hold them accountable, disciplining them, telling them that this is not acceptable, trying to correct them, he would kind of laugh or smile or just shake it off like, no big deal. These guys won't continue to make mistakes. Doesn't matter to me. And Beltran is someone who's so quiet, I would see him not necessarily smiling or laughing, but I don't see Beltran really getting on a player if they make a very foolish, dumb decision while playing baseball. The next guy on the list is Ron Washington, who's been spending a lot of time as either a base coach or a bench coach. Been a while since he managed. At least he does have some experience. Ron Washington, I wouldn't go crazy like, oh my gosh, the Mets got him, but I wouldn't slam the pick either. I'm kind of indifferent on Washington. Eduardo Perez is someone who I do not find very intriguing. He's another guy who would be a rookie manager. He spent a lot of time in the booth, and a lot of times people sound a lot better in the booth than they are on the baseball field. So Eduardo Perez, you would be taking another big time risk. He could be even worse than Luis Rojas. He could be a lot like Aaron Boone, who was one of his co-workers. Bob Melvin via trade, which this is my first choice. My first choice is Bob Melvin. And the reason because that is, like I said, having that mentality of trying to be aggressive. And this was so evident with Bob Melvin when the Oakland Athletics acquired Starling Marte. And Marte ended up leading Major League Baseball in stolen bases, and he did most of that while he was with Oakland, when he played less games with Oakland than he did with Miami. So Melvin having that kind of approach, if the Mets somehow sign Starling Marte, that'd be a very nice move. But you send Marte, send Nimmo. If you bring back Baez, send him, send Lindor. You just create so many more things for your offense. People in my Twitter match think that Billy Beane is some genius. Well, a lot of the Oakland Athletics success also has to do with Bob Melvin, because he's the guy coaching them. You could have a great executive, but a manager could ruin it. So Bob Melvin would be my first choice. What you would have to give up in a trade, who knows, because manager trades are not common at all, so we don't really know what the standard is, what the market is for those kind of moves. But it's something that I would have to try, because I do think that Bob Melvin would help the team. Would I be willing to give up a J.D. Davis or Dom Smith to do this? Not necessarily. Obviously, I would much rather prefer to be a couple of lower level prospects. Clint Hurdle doesn't do much for me. He's not a guy that has been a proven winner. He got fired recently, so he's not someone that I'm very high on. Joe McEwing is pretty interesting. He spent some time in Chicago's franchise. He's regarded as a good coach. He's been around. So he has a good amount of coaching experience as far as being a major league manager. Doesn't have too much experience there, so I'm okay with him. But he's still not someone I really would want to go after. Buck Showalter is another person I see some people like. I think the game has really gone past Buck Showalter. I think he is a little too old to be managing. And this modern day of baseball, especially if analytics continue to become a bigger part, and the Mets want to incorporate more analytics, something that Sandy Alderson wants to focus on, something I know Steve Cohen wants to focus on. So I don't think that necessarily would mesh well with Buck Showalter. And he's not a guy that's a proven winner. Buck Showalter does not win World Series. In fact, far too often, once Buck Showalter leaves, then the team's successful. I mean, we saw Buck Showalter blow a huge game with Baltimore when he did not go to Zach Britton, who was having one of the greatest years we'd ever see from a reliever. Todd Zeile, just no. I mean, he has bad enough takes in the booth. He has bad enough takes on the post-game show. I do not need him to be my manager. He does not show me managerial qualities. I don't think he can get the most out of these guys. I don't think he's going to make the right decisions in the bullpen or with the lineup. So Todd Zeile, no thank you. John Gibbons is someone that he didn't really amaze me when he was with Toronto. He's not someone that you really see in interviews for managerial openings, so there must be a reason for that. He must not be thought of that highly around Major League Baseball, so I don't think very highly of him either. Now, Miguel Cairo, this is one of the most interesting names on this list in my opinion, because I can see Miguel Cairo being kind of similar to Alex Cora, because Miguel Cairo doesn't have the Major League managerial experience, but he does have the managerial playing experience, which is something that Luis Rojas lacked that Alex Cora has over him. That's something even Aaron Boone has over him, Carlos Beltran has. Miguel Cairo is a guy that was a utility player, so he played a few different positions so he could help out multiple players. And he played on a lot of different teams, so he learned from a lot of different managers, very similar to Alex Cora. So I think that Miguel Cairo is a guy who is in a good age range where he has a little bit of the new school and a little bit of the old school values, and is someone that I think could probably turn out to be a decent manager one day. So I would not be against Miguel Cairo. Now, two more names I want to throw out there. There was a report that came out that Sandy Alderson wants to contact Brad Ausmus. I have no interest in bringing in Brad Ausmus, whether it was with Detroit or the Angels. Brad Ausmus' last managerial stint did not go well at all. He made a lot of very questionable moves, and I didn't even watch his teams play often, but when I did, I was like, wow, this is not a good manager. Similar to Gibbons, when a team has a managerial opening, you don't see Brad Ausmus's name constantly popping up. Again, not many teams want him. So I don't know what Sandy Alston's fascination is with him. He would not be my top pick. Now, someone that's a little bit controversial that I personally would be a fan of is Wally Backman. And the reason because that Wally Backman spent a good amount of time in the Mets organization. Even though he was coaching the minor league teams, Wally Backman had some experience with that. He currently has been coaching in Long Island Ducks. And you know what? The Ducks turned around Rich Hill. So the Ducks do have a little bit of credibility. Obviously, I do have a bias to Long Island. But similar to I talk about Miguel Cairo, obviously, Wally Backman has major league experience being on the 1986 championship Mets. And he will have those old school values, those old school traditions. And if you look up Wally Backman rants, you look up what Wally Backman does as a coach, this is a guy that would not stand for mediocre and unacceptable play. This is a guy that would be all over the players, would have them playing much smarter baseball, be much more aggressive, and would just be a complete opposite of Luis Rojas, which it looks like that's exactly what the Mets need. We'll see if maybe the new president of baseball ops has a say in this, or the New York Mets make a decision before they even hire the president of baseball operations. So again, let me know what you guys think. Hope you like this video. I will be making more content as the playoffs is getting started and the off season is right around the corner. You know that's where I thrive, is in the off season. So until then, be safe, be smart, be healthy, and let's go Mets. Finally get a good manager, please.